The joy of playing video games. What could be more valuable than that? Well, how about not playing video games? By either keeping your game sealed or getting your hands on a game that is sealed, you could be looking at some big time money either in your pocket or on your shelf as a collectible. The thing is, one of the most primal instincts for a gamer when they buy a game is to open it up and play it. It would be like if you bought food and then didn't eat it. If only there was a market for uneaten food. Heck, for some sort of non-perishable canned something or other, there probably is. Point is, there's not a lot of sealed games out there. So if there's just a handful of these sealed games floating around and they only really apply to these big game hunters who want to throw their big money at them, then who cares, right? It's got nothing to do with us who just want to play our already opened games, right? Well, this is what I used to think too, but here's the problem. Because a lot of these sealed games are getting graded and locked into these hard cases, it's starting to bleed its way into unsealed games as well. The idea behind getting something graded is to take something that's valuable and then get it graded to make it even more valuable. And video games do not have to be sealed to have value. So naturally, some collectors look at their games and think, hey, this isn't sealed, but I could still get it graded and make it even more valuable. So they do that, and bada bing, bada boom, they've got it. Now, for the most part, this is only happening to games that at least have their case or box and instruction manual, but I guarantee you, if it hasn't already happened, it is going to happen to loose cartridges as well. Your little Samsons of the world, any sort of high profile games like that. So I suppose that in that way you could say that the issue is more so games being graded than it is games remaining sealed. But either way, the issue that I'm noticing is video games are more and more being viewed as something that can be strictly a collectible, which is a problem for us because what you have is more people getting after them who aren't necessarily wanting to play them, and therefore taking them away from those of us who do want to play them. Now, I suppose that they could argue, well, there's other ways to play those games. It's not like you have to have the original hardware in order to play them. But if that's how it's gonna go, I could make the same argument right back. If all they can do with those sealed games is look at them, there's other ways to do that too. It's called the internet. And sure, it's more so about owning the games and having them in their possession for these sealed collectors, but I would just say the exact same thing for those of us who play these games. Some of us prefer to have physical copies of the games to play. What I find interesting is that for older games, you really didn't have a lot of people who were intentionally keeping their games sealed back in the day because they thought they'd be valuable years and years later. I mean, remember, back then a lot of people thought video games wouldn't be worth jack diddly squat, sealed or not, in the future. But for newer games, it's a totally different story. Now that the cat's out of the bag that sealed games can be worth money, it's completely changed a lot of people's behavior. You have some people now intentionally buying sealed games because they think if they hang on to them, they will increase in value later on. And I'm not sure how long this has been going on, but I feel like people are less willing to open sealed games now, and especially if the game is even relatively old at all. For example, I was recently trying to buy a 2008 release Xbox 360 game called Raiden Fighters Aces, a compilation of a bunch of classic Raiden shoot-'em-up games. Now, what I found trying to buy this game on eBay is that the majority of the listings were sealed copies of the game with ridiculous prices. At times, there wasn't even a single unopened copy of the game that I could purchase. So boom, right there, there's an example of somebody just wanting to play a game being affected by all this sealed game madness going on. And this was over the course of 3 weeks, so it's not like I wasn't patient looking for it. I do want to address some of the skepticism surrounding sealed collectors and whether or not they are actually fans of these games. Of course, the skepticism comes from the fact that if the games are sealed, then they can't play them, and how could they be a fan of the game if they can't play it? Well, in some cases, I think they probably do have an additional playable copy, but really the best way to tell what kind of fan they are they looking to just flip a profit on these games, or do they genuinely want to have these games in their collection for the foreseeable future? I also want to talk about another type of sealed game collector that you really don't see very often, but lucky for us, we actually do have one as a regular viewer of this channel. It is the YouTube channel Good Vibe Collecting, and what you'll see on Good Vibe Collecting is actually sealed games being opened up. And a big part of the idea here is to get an older game in really nice condition, because when you buy an older game nowadays, especially if you buy it online, you really have no idea what kind of condition it's going to arrive in. Sure, you can look at pictures, but there always seems to be surprises once you actually get them in the mail. So if you're somebody who hates sealed games, then you should love this sort of thing, because not only are you seeing a sealed game get unsealed so that it can potentially be played, you're also seeing a sealed game being taken away from a potential sealed collector who will get it graded, have it sit on a shelf to never be played again, that sort of thing. However, there are still some games that would be really hard to open, even for the most adamant open up your games person, because some of these older games, if they're still sealed, are worth so much money now, it can almost feel like you're throwing money away if you open them. And it's not necessarily being greedy, but what if some emergency came up and you needed that money for something and you're like, oh, I guess I shouldn't have unsealed that game. And then, of course, there is the whole I can do what I want with the things I own argument, which is very much valid. If I wanted to, I could glue all my cartridges together with peanut butter and use it as lawn art. Well, at least until those pesky neighborhood raccoons found out about it. Now, you could think that I'm stupid for doing this, much like you could think that a collector is stupid for keeping sealed games, but you can't stop them from having their sealed games, much like you can't stop me from having my peanut butter cartridge lawn art. But with all this being said, I really do think the biggest threat for us retro gamers who play our games is those unsealed games being graded, because as soon as those games get graded, they're in those hard cases, and a lot of those cases are not going to be opened anytime soon, if ever. Hey, you know how I talked about the YouTuber Good Vibe Collecting opening up sealed games? What about a channel dedicated to opening up graded games? Now that would be something. But that about does it for my thoughts. Of course, I want to hear what all of you have to say, and I know a topic like this can get pretty heated, but let's try not to go too crazy so that the comment section doesn't look like an angry mob. So with that, leave your comment down below, and I will see ya in the next video.
He's the retro bird, yeah, and he's talking about